Thank you, Marie-Louise. Can you see and hear properly? Yeah, it seems to be working. I see the sign of Nora. Thank you so much. Well, this is not a full-scale academic lecture, but just a few sketchy lines and small attempts to provide kind of a carpet of associations and brainstorming exercise in terms of the religion and development discourse, which goes on several levels. I realize that this is not working right now. This is always very interesting. Once you wanted to start, I have to do this again, and we'll try another way. So let's see whether you can see this one. Is that also feasible for you?
Yes, we can.
I will give you 4 major groups of small considerations: where we come from, points of departures, new contextual challenges in the post-corona period, some inbuilt tensions and contradictions within the current SDG agenda, and priorities for joint international research and dialogue in religion and sustainable development issues. Well, you see at the beginning, there always was a request to provide more evidence in terms of the significance and relevance of faith-based organizations for development. And there are many indications now in the last 10 years or so that we don't have too much evidence as such. We don't have too much lack of evidence as such in terms of the significance of religious communities as partners for development cooperation. The Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, in Germany has issued its strategy, which is well known for some of us here. And we also have the Joint Learning Initiative, which is based in the US, in New York, and they have regularly issued certain annual reports on major publications concerning knowledge partnerships and evidence on the significance of religious partners for development. But the question certainly is this kind of a short-term interest in global and national discourse, or how about the changing political scenarios, as we have changing political scenarios both in Germany? As you all know, we are entering a period and are already in a period where the political discourses are centering around the run-up for the final elections this autumn. But there have been also changes in the global political scenery, and there will be also changes in the UN. So the question is the concern and the openness of political bodies for the religion and development agenda, is that a seasonal phenomenon just limited for a certain period, or is this a long-term kind of concern? And how we can build this in as representatives both of scholarly work and also of religions, how can we build this in more systematically in advisory structures or faith-based organizations and religious communities for political bodies? That is what is on our agenda now on many in many areas. You are also aware of the different scenarios in terms of religion and development. We know these graphs which interrelate the average wealth situation in certain countries and the intensity of religion, which is quite different between a country like Pakistan, which you see on the top left on this one graph, and a country like Britain or Germany, which is on the far right, but low in terms of religious intensity and the importance given to religion in people's life. This certainly affects the different religious demographies, and the intensity of religion affect political attitudes in terms of the relation to faith-based organizations. And we need to consider this much more closely, because it affects also religious state regulation and legislation concerning the life of religious bodies in different parties. We still lack in many countries with high religious intensity, like Pakistan, like Bangladesh, other countries, we lack truly interreligious, egalitarian state legislation. A country like Iraq or Syria, Pakistan do not have equality of religious rights and FOB basic guarantees provided. So there is a huge issue in this regard, which we should not lose sight of. The team in religious, in sustainable development and religions research in Humboldt University has done a lot of good research, particularly on churches beyond the mainline spectrum, particularly Pentecostal and African independent churches. It is about the concern to look for the decolonialization of development, which ties in with the changing ecclesial landscapes, both in Europe and also globally. What are these changing ecclesial scenarios which have a certain impact on the discussions on religion and development, and how to hold together political decolonialization and also ecological decolonization? Because I would argue that we can speak of a double type of decolonialization, because the whole of human civilization in past centuries has colonized this earth to an extent which leads to an exhaustion of the whole earth, and we need urgently some experiences of rest for our planet to survive. So how to interrupt the cycle of violence between violence between human civilization, our type of economy, and nature, or the whole of creation, is an urgent question, which is particularly raised in the discourse on sustainability and ecological transformation. Human culture is the only one which has invented systems of unlimited growth. No other species on life of Earth could invent types of development which are built on the logic of unlimited growth. But these systems of unlimited growth, whether it is in the area of technology, economy, or the global financial system, they are not healthy, and they have a destructive role and effect on the very nature of our ecological entities and balances on our planet. So we need to be more persistent in the question of ecological social transformation of human civilization. We need to ask, are Protestant cultures too late in responding to ecological transition due to what Lynn White has described as the captivity of Western Christendom in a type of attitude to nature which is in a certain reading of the Dominium Terrae tradition of the biblical creation narratives. Roman Catholic Church's tradition, as you know, with Laudato Si, has been very vocal on this, but the question is there an equivalent answer, both of Orthodox and Protestant churches? And that is our expectation also for the forthcoming assembly in Karlsruhe, whether the Global Ecumenical Fellowship can articulate a proper answer to the very far-sighted and prophetic announcement which come from the encyclica Laudato Si. You might know that Roman Catholic churches now have started a very interesting action platform where all segments of the Roman Catholic Church are invited to contribute to the implementation and practical steps of Laudato Si imperatives. This is something which demands much more attention also in global research. We have also learned about the intersectionality between global climate justice and global health issues. The vulnerability of the human family has been shown in a way which is unprecedented. Although we are a bit relieved now in the German situation, we should not forget that the situation both in Brazil, in India, and in several other Asian countries is far from easy, and it is still catastrophic. So did we underestimate and under-research the relevance of religion for national health and for global development, for global health system, for resilience and local populations, for vaccination hesitancy or for vaccination readiness. The interrelation between religion and health is on the agenda very much. There is another issue which also is of key concern for our organization, Bread for the World. This is shrinking space of civil society. We've just published a recent Atlas der Zivilgesellschaft, which gives the key message that 88% of the global population live in closed, restricted or suppressed societies. This is also raising the question to what extent measures which are meant to contain the pandemic are misused to restrict space of religious organizations and civil society in general. So are we idealizing a past pivot role of faith actors in our research, whereas in some contexts, a gradual and complete suffocation of religious actors and global crisis of democracy is taking place? I'm thinking particularly also of situations in Iraq, of Pakistan, certainly some Arab-speaking other countries as well. This also means that the whole concern of freedom of religion and belief should be much more on our attention, and we are glad that BMZ, with the Office of the Speaker on Faith, Freedom for Belief, is playing a major role in this. But I think in research there is a lack of attention to issues of freedom of religion and belief. The other issue which we should be even more aware of is also the question of new cathedrals of modern digital economy. A few global giants only controlling the whole of global communication and digitization. I've read studies indicating that there are 7 major digital commercial enterprises globally which are controlling almost 90% of the whole digital and digitization technology processes around in the world. What is our relation as religious actors and also as researchers concerned about religion and development, about the ongoing digitalization process on this world? Have we underestimated the power of global digitization trends and their impact on religion and their quasi-religious claims? That is a question I would also like to give in our group. Our time runs out with regard to the period of the current 2030 SDG agenda. Only 8 to 9 years are left behind. There is a report, a civil society SDG monitoring report 2020 from last year, which is very disturbing, and I would recommend this to all of you. Time to reach for the moon, time to reach for the still achievable, but we need more political determination in terms of the SDG agenda, because the pandemic and its following implications have led to a major delay and a widening social gap and rising inequalities, particularly in the European Union, but also much beyond. There are open questions even within the internal structure of the SDG agenda, particularly the relation between the economic goals of the SDG agenda and the ecological goals, which are the latter ones from 15-16 onwards. How is an SDG agenda possible with a more clearly defined concept of green growth, which moves beyond the identification of progress with the rise of the GDP and the identification of the quality of life with the number of goods to consume? So how to reconcile economy and ecology is a question which systematically on the global level of the UN is certainly severely discussed, but it's not solved yet in a binding agreement. Why should we still use the GDP measurement for progress and growth if there are more appropriate terms of measurement for human alternative development, which would use the World Waste Index or other measurement indices, which would force governments to have a redirection of their whole economic planning. I would argue that the theology of the Sabbath, the interruption of the cycles of violence in terms of the relation between humankind, the realm of animals and nature, that this theology of Sabbath, ecologically interpreted, is the beginning of a proper ecological metanoia, and this should be related in reviving an ancient Christian virtue and tradition, which is based on the Orthodox theology of fasting, and certainly also the Roman Catholic theology of fasting, which played a much more prominent role in the life of Christianity in the early centuries. To go, very interesting subject, might we should work more on this regard. So ancient Christian traditions and certainly also indigenous religious traditions today are treasures which reach out beyond a materialistic concept of growth, and these concepts should be brought into the debate in order to strengthen a different type of economy which strengthens the common good for all humanity and for nature in our context. There are some promising signs in the new Green Deal, which the European Union has developed, but it has a certain key systematic weakness, that it leaves out the common agricultural policy, the so-called GAP, in Europe, and a new Green Deal, which wants to make ecological standards into a key requirement for all realms of politics, kind of a mainstreaming of ecological concerns into all realms of European policies. That should be promoted by churches and faith-based organizations, but we should also demand for a new global Green Deal, because the European reorientation of politics will never achieve its goals without being accompanied by a global new Green Deal. That is on our agenda. I'll come to the close in shedding one light again on the global level. UNFPA, the UN Population Fund, is the forerunner for a dialogue with faith-based organization, and the IATF, the Interagency Task Force on Faith-Based Organization, which was set up by Azar Karam and other colleagues, has played a unique role, and they also have set up a UN advisory multi-faith council, multi-faith advisory council. But apparently there is nobody in there from German background. That is some kind of interesting fact. So I wonder whether we actually do enough in terms of presence on the international level. And we should clearly plea for a more systematic involvement of key representatives of faith-based organizations on the UN discourses level in this multi-faith advisory council. A key role in Berlin will also play that Religions for Peace, which had their assembly in Lindau, are in the process of setting up a more stable office and professionalize its work also on European level in relation to an office in Berlin. I would hope that at some stage there will be a move to create a think tank of Religions for Peace, might be in collaboration with Humboldt University and actors together here, and that we because what we miss is kind of a multi-faith Academy of World Religions for Sustainable and Peace in the Berlin context. That is something which our government could offer, but they are still don't see, I think, the chance and need for it. So what are priorities for international research and dialogue in religions and sustainable development? We need to move ahead in terms of an interreligious ethics for sustainability. Green Faith is doing a lot in this regard. We need also to work on a new conduct of relationships between majority and minority religious community, and to build on the so-called Marrakesh Manifesto with leading Muslim scholars, which has come from Morocco, and a leading network of good Muslim scholars, and we need a new coalition between the best of science, particularly Earth system science people, and the best of religious representatives, some kind of think tank in cooperation with universities, in cooperation with scholarly networks like the one you are representing here now. And we need to move ahead in terms of a new criteria for measurement of impact of a new kind of a follow-up agenda, post-2030 agenda, because we are almost sure that the world community of states as a whole will not be able to achieve all 17 key goals which are set in the current SDG agenda. Then certainly, finally, the question also is how to overcome inequalities in terms of access and decision-making power in international research policies and in planning. That is a key question of participation. I will just keep this on our screen, a few suggestions for the panel now to follow. Some questions have come from the organizers, and I have just added a few questions from my side. So feel free to take this into your consideration once you enter now into the next phase. I will give back to the moderation. Thanks a lot for your kind attention, Marie-Louisa.